Greetings and welcome to more VTOL VR. And today, rather than doing another campaign mission, I thought I'd do a quick tutorial on basic vertical takeoff, flight and landing. That's right, I'm doing a tutorial video. I mean, this might actually be the first tutorial video I've ever done, so please be gentle. But I thought I'd just share a few tips and tricks and things that I have discovered whilst playing this game that make vertical takeoff, well, vertical takeoff is easy, vertical flight and most critically of all, vertical landing are the tricky parts. And there are systems that the game provides that make life a lot easier for you. But before we get onto that, a couple of things. First of all, I apologise for the cursor in the middle of the screen. It's a rookie mistake. I captured the cursor and of course I had the VR headset on, so I didn't notice during the recording. I apologise, I didn't have time to go back and re-record. It won't be there for next time. Also, for the most part, I'm not going to be using external camera footage. I'm just going to be using the head display or the over-the-shoulder display so that you can see more clearly what's going on in the cockpit and what I'm doing. Now, whilst not strictly related to vertical takeoff, flight and landing itself, is that you can move the in-cockpit joystick and throttle lever to a comfortable position. So you can move it down or up, you can move it forward or backwards and forwards, and you can move it from side to side. You can get it in exactly the right position that you're most comfortable with. I like to have it so that I can rest my my real-life elbow on the arm of my chair here, and then I can kind of operate the flight stick. And the important thing to remember about operating the flight stick is once you grip it, effectively your motion controller then becomes the joystick. So you're not like grabbing the joystick and moving the joystick around. You're making your controller into the joystick. So you grab it, and at that position, that's considered the sort of neutral joystick position. And then if you tilt the joystick, if you tilt the motion controller back, it's like pulling the joystick back. If you tilt it forward, it's like pushing the joystick forward. And that's a little bit different to the way if you've played, for example, Ultra Wings, or indeed the way that I've been doing it in my game. It's an interesting system. It means that effectively it feels more natural in a way because you're obviously gripping the motion controller, and where the motion controller is where the joystick is if you line it up correctly, and therefore it can feel very natural. So it's just an important thing to bear in mind when operating the joystick control, to treat it like you're holding a joystick once you've gripped it. And indeed to get it lined up with the joystick in the first place is like the trick there. Alright, so once we've done that, we can grip that. We can also raise and lower the whole seat, so you can set yourself to exactly the position you want, again to give yourself comfortable access to the throttle control here. That's probably the most important thing, and also good vision through onto the heads-up display. Now, a few things on the heads-up display before we take off that are important. Obviously, you've got your tilt control in the upper left-hand corner there. That's showing 90 at the moment, which is obviously straight up, and we can tilt that forward using our thumb pad or indeed the thumbstick, presumably on the Oculus, once we're holding the stick. So obviously we're going to leave it straight up. Also, bear in mind, it doesn't need to be either straight up or straight forward. You can have anywhere in between, which is useful when transitioning between those two flight modes. Obviously you've got speed in meters per second. That's just speed over the ground, and it isn't necessarily in the forward vector, so it's not necessarily down the way you're facing, it's just your speed over the ground. Then we've got hull, obviously that's not important right now. The G's that we're pulling, again, not really important in vertical flight. And we've got our brake, which also indicates our air brake when we're in the air. And then on the left-hand side at the bottom, again, I pointed this out last time, but if I move the stick around, you can see there's a little dot that's moving around, and that dot is just showing me where my joystick position is. So that's useful for, again, making sure that you've got that lined up correctly and without having to, because you can't see your hand, you can't see the way you've got your joystick oriented without, taking your headset off. I think that's really handy. More important than the little dot though, if I twist the grip, and this obviously operates the rudder, if I twist the grip, you can see there's a line. And that's a really important feature, because accidentally twisting the grip, obviously you've got no tactile feedback as to your twist really on the joystick, so it does kind of give you a little bit of haptic as you twist, but nonetheless it's very easy to drift off center. So it's good to get into the habit, especially in vertical flight, of flicking your eyes down at that control and just making sure that you're not operating the rudder unless you're intending to operate the rudder. Just above that we've got our altitude, and next to that we've got our vertical velocity. So at the moment it's like 0 and it's like flickering back and forth between plus and minus. those are the most important things. Oh, down at the bottom as well, you see the little picture, the sort of overhead shot of the aircraft with the circle around it. That will show us our velocity direction relative to the craft. So let's just fire up. We'll do its vertical takeoff, and you can see what all those things do. So as I give it some thrust, give it a little bit of afterburner. It's always good to take off with a bit of afterburner, I feel. Gets you off the ground quickly, just in case there's anything out there. So you can see the vertical velocity is rising. We get a nice tall vertical arrow to give us a quick indication of how rapidly we are rising. We also get the numerical value next to it. And if you look, a small arrow has appeared just moving around that circle. So that's the direction we're traveling in, and the speed that we're traveling in that direction. So our speed is 12 meters per second, but it's in the direction of that arrow. So if I tilt forward, the arrow will lengthen. If I tilt to the side, it moves around to the side because our velocity vector is shifting. We're now sliding sideways effectively. And that's very important because you don't want to be landing in vertical flight mode when you're traveling sideways because you'll tip over. It happened to me so many times before I kind of figured that little trick out. Okay, so I've taken myself over to the nearest city in order to demonstrate landing. Hopefully that's what we're going to do. Also, the various flight assists that you've got. Now, the two important ones when it comes to vertical flight, actually I don't know what HDG does, so I don't know if it's important or not, but nav obviously just navigates you to your selected waypoint, so that's not terribly useful when it comes to vertical flight and landing, but hover and altitude are. Now, hover keeps you stationary over the ground in your X and Z axes, whereas altitude keeps you at a fixed altitude above the ground. So altitude effectively manages the throttle for you in order to keep you at the same altitude, and hover manages the stick for you in order to keep you from drifting too far. Now, they're not 100% perfect. You will get a little bit of drift. As you can see, we are moving a little bit. Also, what's important to know about these is you can override them without taking them off. So I can, for example, grab the throttle and increase the throttle in order to increase my altitude, and then the altitude, automated altitude, will try and keep me at that altitude, which makes life vastly easier. I mean, with these two modes on, landing vertically is much easier. So, like, as you know, as a demonstration, all we got to do is grab the stick, and we'll just ease ourselves forward. As I say, they're not perfect. We are gaining a little bit of altitude, but never mind. Drop ourselves down. Now, the key to vertical flight is keeping an eye on our direction vector, our vertical velocity, and indeed just meters per second, and keeping all of our movements relatively slow and controlled. Now, with those flight assist modes on, you can always basically just release control and allow it to stabilize. So if you kind of like get yourself a little bit, you know, you tilt it too far and you think, whoa, hold on, you can just release the stick and you can let the computer take over and more or less keep you level. Now, as it happens, it's struggling to keep our altitude, so we need to give it a little bit more thrust, increase the altitude. Twist grip to rotate. Now, you'll find at low speeds you can turn really quite quickly, actually, because you've got like some kind of rocket assisted SAS stability enhancement jiggery pokery. Go, just easing ourselves in. Over the helipad, so we can literally just let off control, drop down. We don't really want to hit the ground faster than about -2 or 3. There we go. It can be a little bit. The only problem with having altitude on as your control is that, you know, it means that where this actually is when you grab it isn't necessarily where it's going to be. Let's just ease it all the way off. Turn altitude control off. We are down on the ground. We'll operate our brake control to prevent us from rolling about, and that's how you land. It's actually incredibly easy if you utilize these navigation autopilot modes. So that's how to do it if you want to make life easy on yourself, or if, in the middle of at the end of a long and critical mission and you don't want that risk of failure. Of course, it's a lot more fun to land without these, and I believe it's possible for these systems to be damaged during combat, so it's always a good idea to know how to land this thing without the automated systems and to be confident and comfortable with doing it anyway. So let's take off again. Alright, so managing without the autopilot. It's basically the same thing, except you've got to be a lot more slow and a lot more careful and a lot more deliberate about your actions, because you can't just rely on the autopilot to stop you effectively. So if you want to slow down, keep an eye on your velocity vector. Look, it's dead ahead. So we just tilt the nose back past the horizontal indicator, so that flat line there is like the horizontal indicator. If we're on that line, we should be neither accelerating nor decelerating in our forward vector. So there we go, look, we're more or less stopped. We're at 3 meters per second. It's actually drifted around. We look at our velocity vector indicator down at the bottom there, and we're more or less stopped. It's moving around because we're moving so slowly, and like we just have minor changes in direction made that it moves about the indicator. But we need to go forward, so we've tilted our nose forward past that horizontal indicator. We also need to flick our eyes over to that vertical velocity and keep that from drifting up. We don't want to be going up at this point. We want to come in nice and slow. We want to more or less come in on a glide slope, or on the same sort of idea as a glide slope. And we just need to carefully keep an eye on our speed. We don't want our speed getting up much above 6 or 7 meters per second. It's alright if we hit the ground and our velocity vector is forward. It's not alright if we hit the ground and our velocity vector is off to the side like that, because we'll just tip over when we hit the ground. Wheels will dig in and we'll tip over. So if your velocity vector is off to the side, you need to bank in order to cut that velocity and obviously not overcompensate. There we go, ease it off. Bank that way, and we're down. Brake on. There we go. I mean, was that a good indication? My brake lock was on the whole time. My brake lock was on. You shouldn't have your brake lock on the whole time, because you'll have the same issue if you hit the ground going forward too fast and your brake lock is on. You'll do a cartwheel, and it will be bad. Bad things will happen. So let's turn the brake lock off. We'll do another one. So the thing about vertical flight is all about finesse and small adjustments. When you find yourself having to make big adjustments, that's when you'll just go flying about the place. And those critical indicators are the direction velocity vector and the vertical speed indicator. Like those, with just those two things, you can conduct a safe landing. Like that's it, that's all you need, because the velocity vector also shows you the speed you're going. So the longer that line is, the faster you're going. At the moment I'm heading straight forward. Honestly, that is absolutely fine. If I like tilt off to the side, that is not fine. You can't land like that. So you can either, depending on where you're landing, you can either turn into it and land in that direction, or you can bank, kick the thrust out in the direction opposite to the direction you want to go in. Oh, keeping an eye on that vertical velocity the whole time. Again, you don't really want to be doing like rapid movements like that. You don't want to be oscillating between going up and down. You really want to be trying to keep it more or less in the middle, and that's very, very difficult without the altitude like navigation thing on. You will drift up and down. Like you will need to constantly make little adjustments to the thrust lever there to prevent yourself from going too high up and too far down. And of course that changes as your angle to the ground changes, because part of that thrust is going to be being used to push you forward, and part of it is going to be being used to push you up. The more you're tilted, the more of it is being used to push you forward or to the side, and therefore the more thrust you would need to keep yourself from losing velocity at the same time. But in general, you just need to keep flicking your eyes over to that vertical control, that vertical flight level, and modifying your stick accordingly. Here we go, we're going to come down. Now our velocity vector's off to the side a little bit, so we just need to alter the banking. Coming right in, tilt the nose back, and we're down. Now, this thing can land pretty hard. I mean, you can land up to sort of like 5, 6, possibly 7 meters per second, I think, without causing too much problem. Much beyond that, and you will take the landing gear out, and that'll be it. Game over. You will have broken your machine, and that is not good. However, it can land pretty hard. Ideally, you probably don't want to hit the ground going much over 1, 2, maybe 3 meters per second at negative vertical if you can avoid it. And it's very possible to do that if you just maintain control of that. Of course, the more you're wrestling to control your velocity vector, the harder it is to control that. Now, you can always do a kind of halfway house where you land going at a reasonable speed forward, because that will tend to balance that out. That will tend to make it a little bit easier. It'll be less likely to be drifting to the left or to the right if you've got some forward velocity, because the airflow over your control surfaces and the vehicle itself will tend to correct that drift for you, which I guess is a kind of like half vertical, half horizontal landing. But that is probably beyond the scope of this very basic initial tutorial. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I like doing tutorials. I don't know if I really know enough about this game to do tutorials, but I thought it was worth doing it because there have been a few comments on previous videos about how difficult it is, and I found it really difficult as well, I have to say, to begin with, to manage the vertical landings. And after a few attempts, the key is getting to know those various different elements of the HUD that you can use as a guide. Most crucial of all is that velocity vector indicator at the bottom, because that's usually what happens. Normally you can get it down safely, or either you can hit the ground at an acceptable rate. However, if you're going sideways too fast, the wheels dig in, the thing tips over, then the thrust catches, and the whole thing tips over, and well, I mean, we saw the result of that in my first preparations mission video. So, that is bad. Fire happens and all sorts of terrible things, so you want to avoid that. So that's what the velocity indicator for. And obviously keeping an eye, getting used to just flicking your eyes across to the vertical velocity indicator so that you can see, again, very quickly just from the length of the arrow that's there, you can see how that started to develop. And you can usually detect from that much more quickly than by looking at the surroundings. By the time you notice that you're falling too quickly by looking at your surroundings, you normally have to do a pretty significant correction in order to avoid crashing. So the vertical velocity indicator is your friend, as is the horizontal vector, the direction vector indicator. I don't know what the proper name for these things are. And if you want to make life a lot easier for you, hover and altitude autopilot modes are very, very useful indeed. But the critical thing to remember, hover does not control your altitude. It does not have any impact on the throttle. So if you've got hover on and altitude off, you still need to manage the throttle yourself in order to fly at whatever altitude you want. If you turn on hover and drop the throttle off altogether, you will hit the ground like a brick. Altitude, on the other hand, only tries to maintain your altitude, and it will not try to maintain your hover. So if you're not basically in hover mode and you've got altitude on, then, well, frankly, I imagine bad things will happen, although I haven't tried. Let's try now. Brake lock off. Alright, so, we've got some altitude. Let's turn Alps. Interestingly, it will not engage. Oh, hold on, there we go, now it engages. There we go. So now, I can basically put the stick down, activate altitude. Nope! Nope! No!
Eject. Engine failure. Flight assist failure. Eject. Hydraulic failure.
Basically bad things happen. Altitude probably should pretty much only be used with hover. Possibly also if you're in stable horizontal flight and you always want to maintain your altitude.
Electrical failure.
Well, there we go. That was my first attempt at a tutorial video. I hope you liked it. I hope at least some people out there found it useful. It's pretty simple stuff. It's not that difficult to figure it out on your own. I confess, after all, I did it. But nonetheless, it might not be immediately obvious, especially if you have perhaps not played any helicopter flight sims before, or the likes of Kerbal Space Program and other things, which I highly recommend, by the way. Although, virtual reality Kerbal Space Program, yes please. When will we be getting that? Anyway, that I think will do for this first video. Let me know if you enjoyed it, if it was useful to you. If you'd like to see more tutorial videos in the future, I'm willing to give it a go. Let me know what you'd like me to cover. But anyway, that's for another video. Until then, thanks all for watching everyone. I have been Weird Wizard, and I will see you later.